we'll just start at the beginning and go through it, and then I'll go through my part, and then as we're going through it, Bryce will step in and give you guys some more detail about how things work, why they work that way, because that helps those of you who like to understand how something works, so you can be as safe as you can. And then at the very end, we can circle back a little bit and we can talk about like intubation, extubation, how you pick your tubes, how you pick your drugs, that sort of thing. But that way we can be utilizing Bryce's time as much as possible. Everybody knows Bryce, yes. So if you have anesthesia questions or machine questions or anything else while he's here, he's a very good resource to have for this level of information. I always learn something when he's here.
Hello. All right, so my name is Bryce. I was a vet tech for about 10 years, and then I went to biomed school to get certified to work on medical devices. I kind of hold the veterinary community tight to the chest because they don't really teach a lot of this stuff. But we're gonna go over basic anesthesia today. Pretty simple. To start, we need to know that there's two different types of veterinary anesthesia machines. There's rebreathing and there's non-rebreathing. So we're going to start on rebreathing first. Okay? And you have to have certain components in order for a rebreathing system to be present. Every machine has to have a flow meter, a vaporizer, and an oxygen source at minimum, right? So your flow meter, all that it does is it receives oxygen in through the back. Okay. Now, you'll read textbooks, they'll tell you you have to have 50 psi oxygen source. It's not true. I don't like that they say that, but you don't have to have pressure unless you have a ventilator. The ventilator is being driven by the pressure, which we'll get into in another class in the future. But literally all that's happening is you have oxygen coming in, and the oxygen is not flowing through the flow meter until you open your dial. And when you open your dial, what's happening is the oxygen is flowing around the ball and your ball is spinning. This tube here is graduated, so at the bottom it's smaller, and as it gets taller, it's wider, okay? So the more we open this, the more you can hear it, right? So pretty simple. Sometimes the ball can get stuck, but whatever you're measured at is exactly what's coming out. There's no way for it to be at 1 and putting out 2. It doesn't work that way. It's purely simply based on the graduation of the tube, okay? If we follow everything, the oxygen goes around this ball, right? Up, out of the back, through this tube. Your tube from the flow meter will always run into the vaporizer. Okay, we'll get into the vaporizer in a second. Okay, so we have to have a flow meter, a vaporizer, and then the rebreathing component of the machine is this entire contraption here. And some people call it a rebreathing head, some call it an absorber head. Either way is fine, okay? And what happens in this rebreathing head is very simple to kind of see because you can see all the tubing. So again, oxygen out of the back of the flow meter, through the vaporizer, out of the vaporizer, and we can just follow the tubes into the rebreathing head. So when it comes into this particular rebreathing head, the channel in here is directly connected to the inhale valve, okay? So it cannot go from here to the exhale. It has to go to the inhale, right? So inhale is always gonna go towards your patient, and your exhale is always gonna go back into the system, okay? So if we follow it, oxygen in, through the valve, to the patient, right? Are we familiar with these circuits? We are. They're called F circuits or unilimb circuits. What's happening is your oxygen and anesthetic are running through the blue tube to your patient. Your patient will exhale over the blue tube, down through the return tube, back through the machine, okay? What's special about these tubes is you have oxygen, which is a cold inert gas. When oxygen and isoflurane or sevoflurane are mixed together, it's even colder, and that's why you get condensation here, because there's a temperature differential, right? Your inhale going to them is colder than the exhale. So the exhale is technically warming up that inhale going to the patient, and that's why you get condensation, okay? It's supposed to be there. It's not supposed to be there, if that makes sense, okay? Rebreathing circuit, this is all basic. Everybody understand this, right? Okay. So what's really going on in the rebreathing system, and the reason it's called a rebreathing system is because it's removing the CO2 from the system so that the anesthetic and oxygen go back to the patient and they can rebreathe that anesthetic, okay? If they were not rebreathing the anesthetic, it would just go up and out of the system, right? So that's why it's called a rebreathing system. If we look at everything, I'll show you guys that are videoing. The way that it works is the exhale, when the anesthetic and oxygen run back through the machine, the exhale is pushed through these chambers. And because your oxygen is a constant flow, it's constantly being pushed down, and then it all returns back up through this tube, and this tube is directly connected to the inhale. So when this removes the CO2, you have oxygen and anesthetic that just return and go right back to your patient. It's a circle system, and that's what they used to call it back in the day, because it was just circling around over and over and over again, right? Does everybody understand this? Mm-hmm. Okay. This is really, really important. You also don't want to have any Sotasorb in this center tube. If you get a couple rocks in there, not going to hurt anything, you just don't want it full, okay? If it's full, it's kind of like breathing through a straw, right? It creates too much resistance, and you're gonna limit the amount of volume that they can breathe in, right? Questions about this canister? No? All right. So to elaborate a little bit more on the rebreathing head, the inhale valve, when you see an inhale, everybody sees that disc pop up, right? It doesn't pop up. It's actually being pulled down, right? So when you take a breath in, it's a negative pressure, it's vacuum, right? Vacuum. So what's happening is when they take a breath in, they're pulling one side of the disc down, which then lifts the other side, which is what is allowing the anesthetic to run out, right? So on the exhale, your exhale is positive pressure, right? That's actually lifting that disc up in order to let the exhale run into the bag and through the absorber canister, right? Does that make sense? Did everybody know that? Yeah? Okay. All right, so because your inhale is running to the patient and your exhale is running this direction, right? We can always say that the inhale will always have oxygen running out of it, right? So if these are not labeled, you know which is which. You can simply run oxygen and stick your hand over it or squeeze your bag, and you'll know which is the inhale and which is the exhale, right? So as the oxygen is flowing, your patient will inhale it and then they will exhale. The exhalation will fill this bag first. Once the bag is full, you have another component called the pop-off valve. The pop-off valve has a simple weight inside of it. That's all that it is. And every pop-off valve is a little bit different, okay? It's simply a weight and a spring. There's nothing fancy, there's no gremlins in there doing anything special. It's simply just a weight, okay? So what happens is, when the bag has reached its volume, the weight in this channel will lift up, thus in turn letting any additional anesthetic and oxygen out, and it will run into your canister. And it's doing this because you have to have an exhaust in order for the exhale to happen. If we didn't have this here, because oxygen's a constant, you're just increasing and increasing and increasing, and you're gonna cause what's called a barotrauma, which is simply just a popped lung from overpressurization. Questions so far? I know we're going pretty fast. Had a lot of coffee. No questions? Comments? Concerns? Okay. What's that? All right. So when the anesthetic comes up and out of the pop-off valve, it has to flow somewhere, right? So you guys have what's called a passive scavenge system. Passive simply means it's just using the flow of gravity to run into a charcoal filter. You don't have to use a charcoal filter. Some people in some facilities will have this tube run to the outside of the building, and then once it gets to the outside, it just dissipates. Other systems are called active systems, and they have a fan that sucks it all up and pushes it out of the building, right? For you guys, you have charcoal. Charcoal filters, in Florida, they're kind of difficult to measure because we're so humid here. But the real way you're supposed to do this is when you get it in, you're supposed to weigh it, write the weight that you received it, put it in a Ziploc bag, put it somewhere so that it can't absorb anything. And then when you go to use it, you weigh it again and you write the weight that you started on it. Once that weight has increased by 50 grams, you're supposed to replace it.
It's got weights written on it, so I don't
Yep.
know if that, did somebody weigh it? Do you guys always weigh it before you start?
Between each patient.
Between each patient. But does it get weighed when it comes in? Or before you start using it?
Before I start using it the morning of.
So there's 2 consumables on the machine, or there's 3 consumables. This is one of them, and usually you're gonna get about 8 to 12 hours of use out of this. The other consumable is your Sotazorb. Sotazorb is rated for 8 to 12 hours of use. The difficulty with Sotazorb is none of this is manufactured for veterinary use. It's really made for human use and it just gets adapted for veterinary, right? So you guys use that 5-gallon bucket, right? That bucket's made for human use. So for example, let's say Stephanie broke her ankle, God forbid, and she had to go get some plates installed in her ankle, right? Let's just say it's a 2-hour surgery. She goes on a machine for 2 hours, and let's say I need to go on after her. They're not just gonna disconnect her and throw me on that machine. They're gonna take the whole thing apart, disinfect it, and change the Sotazorb, even though it was only a 2-hour surgery, right? So that bucket, a 5-gallon bucket in the human industry, it gets used very, very quickly. Veterinary, you guys would go broke changing this every single time the machine's used, right? So typically you're gonna get about 10 hours of use from the bucket, right? The bucket, every time it's opened, the CO2 in the room starts to attack it. So it lowers the lifespan between that 8 to 12 hour window, okay? Back in the day, Sotazorb would turn purple, right? Everybody knows that. So nowadays it doesn't all turn purple. Some of them do, some of them don't. There's different reactions. So normally you just want to keep track of the time, but the reactions you're going to see are some of them will turn purple, and then with continued use it will turn back to white, and then it will never turn purple again. So if you're relying on that purple color, you're kind of stuck because it won't turn purple again. Some of them don't turn purple. Some of them will turn yellow if you don't change it over time. Some of them will turn purple and stay purple. Some of them will turn purple and get darker and darker and darker with continued use. Those ones that will get darker and darker and darker, they come with a little, hey doc, they'll come with a little color-coded sticker, and it'll have different shades of purple on it, and it will say, when you hit this color purple, it's expired, change it, okay? Sotazorb, if it's not changed in a proper time frame, what's gonna happen to our patient? Do we know?
CO2 is not getting absorbed and it's going back into the patient.
It's going back to the patient, right? Even if it's not expired, if it's almost expired, depending on your patient's tidal volume, you could have condensation in your valves. So you really want to make sure we change this before we see any condensation in here. If we get condensation, you're usually going to see it in the exhale valve, but if you get condensation in the exhalation valve, remember that disc is designed to lift up every exhale. So if there's condensation on that disc, it could potentially get stuck in the up position. If it gets stuck in the up position, what could potentially happen is the CO2 is not going to get scrubbed and it's going to get sent back to your patient, and then you're going to have an inspired CO2. Okay, so CO2 is measured, there's a bunch of different ways, but with you guys, you're going to have end-tidal CO2, which is what's leaving them, and then you're going to have inspired CO2, which is what's going at them. Your inspired CO2 should always be at 0. You should never have any. If you have any, you need to change your Sotazorb, you need to check your valve. If it's an emergent situation, increase your O2 flow rate, right? That'll carry everything faster, right? So those are just little tricks. There's tons of little tricks that we can talk about, but this is really, really, really important. If it doesn't get changed, it can affect everything, right? Does anybody have any questions on Sotazorb?
And now every machine has one of these laminated sheets, and so every 15 minutes, which you don't have to count every 15 minutes, but you have your monitoring sheet and you know you're starting end of anesthesia time. So essentially you look at that sheet at the end and you make sure you marked on your machine how long the machine's been in use. because there's a date on there. It's kind of hard to believe this thing's only been used 1 hour since 6/5 of 24, but that's what it says. Also, when I touch a granule, it kind of feels like it's been used more, but that's what it says. But make sure you're doing this. Make sure everybody knows this, because different people are using these machines all the time. That's how we can.
You don't use your non-rebreather.
What is it?
Your non-rebreather, you don't.
Right,
you
right,
don't mark off the
correct.
times on that.
This is only for, it's gotta be going through this. When you do the non-rebreather, you're not using that system, so yes, you
Correct.
won't need to use it. Thank you, Dan.
Another little trick with Sotazorb, if you're not sure the time frame, you can actually take a granule and press down on it. If it breaks into pieces, it's almost expired or is expired. If it turns to a powder, see how that doesn't turn to a powder? If it turns to a powder, it's still fresh. It still has life left in it, okay? When you have I don't want anybody touching it. It is caustic, but if you're not sure, you can, it's caustic if it's absorbed into a orifice, so just, you're not touching your eyes or licking your fingers or anything like that. But
Taste nice.
it should feel, if you feel it, it should feel like a dampness to it. If it's like stark hard, or sometimes it'll turn yellow, it's expired. Don't even try. Just dump it and start over. Okay? If you don't have a date on there, dump it, start over. It's not worth it, right? So, does anybody know the signs of what happens with the patient when this is expired? No?
The ECO2 will go up, they'll start to get real on a light plane,
Mhm.
they start to respond to certain things.
That's all correct. The number one thing that you're gonna see when this is expired that happens with your patient physically is hyperventilating, right? So I know it sounds really, really stupid.
Do you guys
Me
know
and you
why?
have probably done this.
Do you know
Anybody
why?
ever blow a balloon up really, really big? I know it sounds stupid. You blow a balloon up really, really big, I think people are starting to get where I'm coming from. You're pushing CO2 into that balloon, right? And then you choke on the CO2 and you feel stupid, right? So that's what's happening, is you're pushing CO2 at them, and their body can't process that gas exchange, so they start to fight it, and they're coughing and hyperventilating. And that's what happens when this is either not present or expired. It has to be there, okay? So I've had some facilities where doctor threw this tube away. Don't know why, tube wasn't there, and because everything gets pushed down and then back up, CO2 wasn't scrubbed, right? So you might as well just not even have this in use. That's how important this is, okay? Questions on this? Do we know normal CO2 ranges? What are you guys, under 50?
Yeah, I
Okay.
usually
Yeah.
tell them I like them 35 to
35 to
45.
50.
I can live 50 to
55.
55 if they're breathing on their own
Okay.
well, but we start getting up that high, what are you worried about? If they're breathing well, but yet it's still, the number's still high, what would you potentially be worried about? You know they're breathing, so what's the other thing that might be happening?
Tubes into teeth.
It could be something like that. What else could it be? Related to the machine and what we were talking about right now, what else could it be? If that CO2 is too high.
Your O2 level's too low.
So you decrease it now. Or they're rebreathing CO2. Because if your CO2 level is too high, it's coming from somewhere. Either they're not getting rid of it, the machine's not getting rid of it, your oxygen is not high enough. So you need to check and figure out what's going on, essentially. So.
And along those lines, one of the things that people don't understand is the thing that stimulates your body to take a breath is not your oxygen going down, but it's your CO2 going up.
Right.
So that's how, when they ask that question, like what's gonna happen? If their CO2 is going up, their body's going, I need to breathe, I need to breathe, I need to breathe. That's why you're gonna get hyperventilation.
Right.
But that's one of the ways to easily remember that is, you don't take your next breath because your body's going, I need more oxygen. You're taking your next breath because you're really sensitive to your CO2 levels. And your body is going, my CO2 has gone up, I've gotta breathe, I've gotta breathe.
And while we're on that, we're gonna talk about partial pressure, okay? Does anybody know what partial pressure is? No? Partial pressure is what allows us to breathe. So it's a physics law that says any gas, doesn't matter what the gas is, it could be nitrogen, CO2, oxygen, methane, for all that matters, it will always flow from a higher purity to a lower purity. It cannot flow from a lower purity to a higher purity, right? So this law allows us to breathe. If you think about it, when I take a breath in, I'm taking oxygen from a higher purity, roughly 21%, breathing it in, right? I'm oxygen deprived, I need that oxygen, and then when I exhale, I'm exhaling CO2 from a higher purity to a lower purity. It's simple gas exchange, right? Does everybody understand gas exchange, alveoli, pulmonary capillaries? Yeah? Great, perfect. We'll circle back to that when we go into testing the machine. But this is why Doc was explaining the CO2, okay? When they start to fight it, their body's starving for it and they need it, right? It's fast breathing, just like you. If you run a marathon untrained, you're gonna be keeled over, you know, needing oxygen because you're so out of breath, right? So it's the same kind of concept, it's just finding a way to relate it to understanding machines and things like that, right? Questions so far? No? Okay. Clean this up a little bit, made a little mess here.
Any of you dive? Nobody dives?
That's
So
been a
you
long-
kind of understand some of this
Yeah.
stuff from diving too.
Yeah, I've done. Just that one time.
So if our CO2 is going up, what's another way that we can trigger that to go down? If everything's working right, our sotazorb's good, our O2 flow rate's good, and our CO2 is going up, how do we trigger that CO2 level to go down? We can give a breath, right? So giving a breath, is everybody familiar with giving a breath? It's gonna be kind of hard to do on this machine, but. So we'll put a breathing bag on here, just so you guys can see it. You wanna hold this down? So you guys can see it.
This is your one.
Okay.
This is your long
So
cigarettes.
there's really only three things that can happen. We're either breathing on our own, we're holding our breath, or I'm sorry, we're inhaling, holding our breath, or exhaling, right? That's all we're doing. So when your CO2 level increases, right, we can simply push fresh anesthetic and fresh oxygen into them, which will clear them out of everything, which will lower our end tidal CO2. So to do that, we have to manipulate the system. So your pop-off valves, the only way you're gonna build pressure is to push and hold this button down, okay? Other ones, you have to screw them down. These ones are a little bit different. We'll go into how they work specifically, but what you would do, you would push and hold, oxygen is still flowing, and you lightly squeeze your bag. The general rule is you do not go past 20 centimeters of water, so you'll squeeze your bag. I usually go to 15 to 18, let go of the bag, and let go of the pop-off valve, all in the same time. If you do not close your pop-off valve, what's gonna happen?
It's just gonna go right out the exhaust.
Just going right out of the pop-off, right? Remember, this is the exhaust for the whole system, and we can actually hear it. Just going right out, right? So you have to close that, right? Does everybody know why we don't go past 20 centimeters of water?
Can overexpand the lungs.
Correct. So the real reason we're using 20 is these gauges are not medical grade gauges. They're industrial grade. They're not exactly precise. So that's why I go under 20. You never know. It's not worth it. Keep yourself safe, keep your patient safe, go to 18.
Yeah, the
right?
book says 15 to 20.
Yeah, I was doing 15 to 18.
Yeah.
That's how we teach, just for safety
Oh, for sure.
purposes. Medical grade gauges will cost half the cost of the whole machine, so it just increases the cost exponentially. Okay, that's why all the vet machines have industrial grade gauges. Okay, so going into your pop-off valve. Your pop-off valve that you guys have here is special. This is a very, very special valve. You might all have to kind of stand in the front to see how it works, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna keep the oxygen on, and I'm gonna keep the screw down portion in the up position, okay? And I'm just gonna hold this down, and we're gonna watch the pressure increase, okay? Now when this black piece is in the up position and I push and hold that button down, the pressure should not go past 20 centimeters of water. It is a designed leak in the system for safety purposes, okay? Now, if I just squeeze that bag really, really, really hard, it's gonna go past 20, right? But it's a designed leak. It's all gonna come out of the pop-off valve. So where's our pressure at?
20.
20, right? The problem with this is if you do a leak check and you're simply just pushing and holding this down, you have a designed leak in the system. It's going to appear like you have a leak when you might not, right? So the way you would want to do a leak check, and we're going to go into this and everybody's going to do one, is we're gonna screw this down, and just to alleviate everybody, if I screw this down and I don't push and hold that, it is still open. The valve is not closed, okay? The bag will build slightly larger, but it is not closed, okay? It's a safety component in the system, right? So where's our pressure now?
2.
Should be about 2 to 3, right? So if I push and hold this down, when I have this screw down portion down, it's closed until I let it go. It'll go to 50, 60, 80, whatever you go to until you let your hand off of it, okay? This is where you would want to do your leak check, okay? With the piece screwed down and the button held. So where's our pressure?
15, still climbing.
Yeah, we're climbing. All right, so we'll just let it get up there so you guys can see that that's how it works. Going past 20, right? And then we can even make it go further. Right? So it'll go until you let it go.
So, for those of you that have, we've all worked with machines that don't have that button on the top, right?
Oh, sure.
So this is always something I say, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good.
I'll occasionally interject. So, on machines that don't have this button, everybody's worried about turning the gas up and what you could do to an animal. You don't have this button and you turn this down and that's completely closed, how quickly do you think you could kill a dog that way?
Very quickly.
Instantly.
40, 45 seconds.
I'd say less than a
And
minute.
you know how I know that? Because I killed a dog that way. And so that's why these valves are designed this way. Because if you turn that machine to 5, right, and you forget, that dog will be under anesthesia for probably 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes before you kill it.
Yeah.
But if you close a pop-off valve, you got about a minute and they're
Yeah.
dead. So
Not
that valve is,
even. I would call it 30 seconds.
right, 30 seconds. I mean, as little as 30 seconds you can kill it. That is the most important screw up you can have on an anesthesia machine. We have the safety valve, but anybody here that works on a machine that doesn't have one, if you're ever closing that valve down, your brain should go, I could kill something, make sure I know what I'm doing with the machines.
And I would know that we have the safety valve, but these are probably the first machines that I've used that
Yeah,
haven't.
14 Lucy doesn't know.
Because
They don't have
I
it.
didn't even know until Bryce was here the other day that was how you completely pressure checked the machine, because I kept feeling like something was wrong, and it was because I didn't really know how to use the safety valve. So the way that I like to teach you guys when you pressure check this machine so that you don't leave that valve closed by accident, and you should do this for other reasons anyway that Bryce can also elaborate on related to how the machine functions. When you pressure check the machine, never take your finger from here to release the pressure. Always release the pressure by opening up the pop-off valve. Because if you do that every time before you use the machine, which you should, even if it's the 5th time you've used the machine and you're like, it's fine, it's been working all day, you should always check it every single time. You will not leave that valve closed if you do it that way.
Correct.
If you let your finger off of it, you can do harm to the machine, which I'll let him tell you why you don't want to do that. But you also risk leaving that valve closed. So always just release the pressure by opening up that valve.
As someone who travels to different hospitals all the time, how do I identify that there is a safety valve? Is it the little?
It's the plunger built into the middle. Now, some pop-offs you're gonna see, they're not gonna have, 99% of them you're gonna see, they're not gonna have this button in the middle. They're either gonna have it back here
Okay.
or
Yeah.
underneath. And if
Okay.
it's underneath, it'll be like a block.
Okay.
The buttons that are back here,
Yep.
you cannot leak check from those.
Okay.
They don't hold pressure. They're simply a momentary valve
Okay.
that you push down to give a breath, and that's it.
Yep.
So if you do a leak check from those, they're gonna appear like you have a leak
Okay.
when you don't.
Okay. And
So
the
it's-
button, the only pop off that has the safety is the button,
Is
the
this
pop
one.
off on top.
Correct.
The button on top.
And this was designed by Banfield. Banfield had a bunch of problems in the early 2000s. They designed this for themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, they designed
That's
it.
good though.
Yeah.
Superior.
Ever said thank you, Banfield.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Superior builds it for them, but it's Banfield's design. The patent ran out, so they don't have a Banfield logo on them, but the original ones did have a Banfield logo on them.
Understood.
Okay. While we're on it, if your valve is open and you see that your bag is getting full, what's the quickest way to release that pressure? Right? You gotta think quick. You got 30 seconds before you pop a lung. Disconnect them from where? Anywhere.
Yeah.
Anywhere. Anywhere. breathing circuit to trach tube, bag, breathing circuit on the machine. You can disconnect anywhere. You just have to relieve the pressure, anywhere, okay? Don't worry about the machine. The patient's life is more valuable than the machine, right? So, you know, just be aware of all
Just don't disconnect
that.
it here.
We're gonna get into that. Questions on this? I know this is kind of a little nerve-wracking, but does anybody have any questions on this? This is probably the most important part of the machine.
It definitely is.
No questions? You sure?
Not at the moment.
Okay. So another component on the machine is your pressure gauge, okay? Your pressure gauge should read at 0 when there's no pressure in the machine. If you look at this one, it's not at 0, right? Slightly off. I did that on purpose, okay? So this one's sitting slightly positive, right? So if it's sitting slightly positive before you start, let's say it's sitting at 2 centimeters of water, positive, right? If you go to 20, you're giving 22, right? That's why I do 15 to 18 when I give a breath, okay? So these are the things that you have to be aware of, especially on a ventilator. That pressure gauge will get worn out faster because it's constantly going up and down because of the positive pressure. But if it is sitting positive, you're giving more, right? I'm sorry, you're giving less, excuse me, said it backwards. If it's sitting negative, you're giving more, right? So as long as it's not in the negative, you can operate perfectly fine. If it's sitting negative, we need to get on the phone. You know, we can tell you how to fix that over the phone if need be. It's a simple screwdriver type situation.
So is that on our checklist? Is that something that we should add to a checklist?
This is not anything that 99% of facilities, they don't know this. These are just tips and tricks for you to know, and be aware of.
Yeah, like before we start though, should we, like, is that
Yeah.
something we should
I
take
can add
note
it to
of?
the
Yeah.
checklist.
Yes,
Then I
yeah.
can
Yeah.
advertise it.
You're not gonna see it anywhere else.
Yeah.
No, any other facility you work at, they just call this a gauge. It's called a manometer. Does anybody know why it's read in centimeters of water?
Is it?
And how we measure centimeters of water? No? Okay. Easiest way to think about it. Let's say this is upside down, right?
I squirted that in my nose the other day.
Full of water.
Real sensitive.
Full of water, right? Let's say the water level is here. We'll call that 0. And then every centimeter, we go 1 centimeter, 2 centimeter, 3, 4, 5, right? It's measured up from that 0. If I blow through this tube, that water level is going to increase in the column, right? Depending on the force that I create, the pressure is going to be measured in centimeters of water, simply because of the channel that's in there and the water. Sometimes you'll see millimeters of mercury. Sometimes you can see inches of water. It's really dependent, but it's really important, not here, but anywhere else you go, that you know your gauge is read in centimeters of water. Because if it's in millimeters of mercury and you go to 20, you're giving them 28 centimeters of water.
Do you guys all know where to look for that on here? It says.
I have never seen it speak. Oh, look, anesthesia machine and millimeters of mercury.
You have one here.
Okay, good. Good
I'll
that
show
I'm
you.
looking.
But it also shows centimeters of water,
Yeah.
but it has millimeters of mercury too.
Okay.
So your older one, where you
Yeah.
look from the top,
Okay.
it's measured in millimeters. So you always want to make sure it's in centimeters of water. So this is just a little bit more advanced. How many of you have ever actually looked at it and read it? A lot of people haven't. But you know, if it's in millimeters of mercury only and you go 20, game over, right? Usually going to be on older machines. You don't have to worry about this here or at Port St. Lucie. Okay? Questions?
Yeah, what's your top measurement in millimeters of mercury, so I just don't have to think about it?
14,
14.
13, 14. So,
So 12.
yeah, 12. Yeah. Yeah.
Half.
We also have these components that you guys probably don't need here because you have the valve, but there's now components where we can plug into the exhale port, and if you hit 20, it'll scream at you. It beeps really, really loud. Okay? It's up to you guys. You might see them at other facilities if you work anywhere else, but it literally just plugs in here, and it has a little tube that runs to a box that has a speaker on it. If you hit 20, it's the loudest scream you'll ever hear. It's pretty annoying, but it's a safety component. Okay. Questions so far? Okay. So rebreathing, summarize. Inhales to the patient, right? Exhales going where? back to the machine, right? And then we fill the bag up first. So your bag, does your bag have CO2 in it?
Yes.
Somebody's guessing. Does it? Okay. There's only one machine out there where the bag does not have CO2 in it. Nope, the non-rebreather. But there's only one machine itself that doesn't have CO2 in the bag. And the way that you can see that is the bag is connected to the inhale port. Okay, Francisco has 2 of them. Okay, so anytime the bag is next to the exhale, you've got CO2 in the bag. Okay, so the bag's gonna fill first, and then once the bag is full, your exhale, your pop-off valve is gonna open up and it's gonna let the exhale out. But because this is a constant, remember, it's all being pushed down through the absorber canister, back up through that tube, and it goes right to the inhale, right to your patient, right? Rebreathing, circle system, right? Questions?
Does everybody also understand one of the sort of functions of that bag? And why it's my pet peeve when I see people walk over to the bag and squeeze it because it's full, because you want it to be empty? What is that bag doing essentially? Like when you see the patient and they're breathing under anesthesia, what do you see the bag doing?
It's expanding and contracting,
Right.
so you
So
can
what
kind of
it-
see the breaths as
Right.
they're occurring, and if they're not breathing. the
Yeah,
bag
so
will
they're
start
kind
to
of
fill.
breathing from that bag. Sort of.
Yeah.
So-
If this wasn't here, right? I'm not the crazy guy breathing anesthesia, I promise you. But if I don't have that bag there, watch what happens to my gauge. Ready?
Oh, negative.
Goes negative, right? Because you're creating vacuum. The easiest way to think about that bag, it is an inverse copy of your lung. It's exactly opposite, right? This whole thing is a copy of a lung. The bag is reverse. When you take a breath in, your lungs expand. When they take a breath in, that bag shrinks. When you exhale, your lungs shrink. That bag expands. It's exactly opposite, right? What does your lung system do, right? Allows you to inflate, deflate, gas exchange, which is what this whole thing does. And pressure. You can't hold your breath and kill yourself. I know that's horrible to say, but because you have to exhale, that's what this is for, right? It's an exact copy of a lung. The only thing we're doing is we're introducing a controlled chemical, right? That's all we're doing.
That's a nice way to put it.
Instead of
Yeah.
poison.
Yeah.
Okay, does that make a little bit more sense when you kind of understand it's reverse, right? Okay.
So if you need to give your patient a breath and you've squeezed all the air out of that bag, then you can't. And then you come over here and you press this button and then what happens?
We didn't even get into that yet.
Did you push it, were you shown on the O2 fill?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So the only thing that I mentioned about the O2 fill, and I don't know if you have anything more on
I haven't
O2
got there yet.
fill. Yeah, you're getting to
Yeah.
it.
We won't
Well, I
spoil
was just
your
gonna say,
fun too
when
much, but-
animals are light and you guys are constantly hitting that O2 fill to fill your bag to give them another breath, they'll explain why it's not
Okay.
the best.
So the-
It's 5 passes that you vaporize.
Yeah.
So the flush valve, okay, we haven't really talked about the flush valve because we were talking about the components that you need. You do not need a flush valve, right? A flush valve is an accessory for convenience sake, right? All that the flush valve is designed to do is when you have Rocco on the anesthesia machine and Rocco's done, we can disconnect, right? We'll turn the vaporizer off first, disconnect, and we can clear out the oxygen from the system and get him just on oxygen so he can start recovering a little bit better, right? Does everybody understand how to use a flush valve? You do?
Let's review it.
Yeah.
Okay. So the reason that I say that is because a lot of people are not really sure. And what we see is vaporizer off, they disconnect from the breathing circuit, and then they hold this in the air and they go like this. Okay?
You all have weird dreams.
Why is this not correct? Because of what?
Still got ISO.
Well, I'm pushing it. I'm pushing it into the air, right? That's not even the worst part, right? We're trying to get the anesthetic out of the system. What about all the anesthetic that's over the blue tube? All of this has all anesthetic in it, right? So it's not being cleared. So the proper way to do it is to hold it off and push and hold it And it's all just recirculating out of the pop-off into your scavenge, okay? This, going like this, there's anesthetic. That's not enough to hurt you. It's heavier than room air, so it's gonna sink. You don't wanna sit there and do this, I mean, you know, but you really wanna close this off, okay? And what Dr. Garrity was explaining with this, when you push this, it does not run through the vaporizer. Remember we talked about pressure earlier and how 50 PSI is not correct? The only thing on this machine that's using pressure is this button. That's it. So when you push that button, you're pushing 50 PSI at 30 liters a minute into the system, which is gonna dilute that anesthetic pretty heavily, okay? So you don't wanna push this unless you absolutely have to, where this is flat and you need volume to create breath, right? That makes sense? That's all that it's for. Older machines don't even have these on them, some of them, okay?
And if you have to do that, you should disconnect your patient because
Correct.
you're pushing high pressure now through your system it's different pressure readings, but you're pushing 50 and we told you not to exceed 20. You can't really compare that because they're different pressures, but in your head, if you have to think about it that way, you can. And if you forget, this tube goes behind the vaporizer. So it's totally
this machine.
bypassing on this machine.
machine.
Yeah. But you can always follow these tubes. If you guys, those of you who aren't as comfortable with anesthesia, I encourage you to just come over here and just watch how things move.
You can't break it. Look, they don't even come off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just follow. Oh, where does this tube go? Oh, why does that tube go there? Why does this tube go there? And then you'll understand better yourself why we tell you to do certain things. You shouldn't just do it because I told you to do it or because Bryce told you to do it. You should do it because you understand how the machine works. And if you don't feel comfortable with how the machine works, please approach any of us or your colleagues and say, hey, could you show me why this is like this? This looks really weird. Because sometimes you guys find a problem. And I don't know why that valve is hooked up there. It shouldn't be
And
hooked
if
up
you're
there, so.
uncomfortable asking staff, you have a phone number right here. Goes right to me. Call me. Anything. That's what we're here for. Okay? Anything at all. Okay? To go back to the flush valve. You don't have to use the flush valve, right? You can just increase your O2 flow meter, right?
And what else happens if you just increase your O2 flow?
What happens if you increase your O2 flow rate?
And your vaporizer is still on.
And it's on.
What are you actually accomplishing?
Well, there's a misnomer with that.
That's true.
Okay, so O2 flow rates. What are our normal O2 flow rates for a normal healthy patient? Let's just say we're doing a neuter on a 1.5-year-old dog.
2 to 2.5.
Okay.
He doesn't seem to agree, Dan.
It's not.
There's different
formula to calculate.
There's different
It's like 25
rates people use.
50.
Yeah.
So we usually see between 1 to 3, right? So your flow meter, if you guys look at it, only measures to 4, right? If you open this all the way to where you can't open it any further, it's 60 liters a minute. 60. If you push and hold that, it's only 30, right? If you increase this all the way, you're still clearing everything out, but you're not adding pressure. Pressure and flow are different. Pressure is the force being exerted against something. Flow is the volume of something passing through that something, right? So you can increase this, but if your vaporizer is open, what are we doing to the anesthetic? We're diluting it, right? So there's a lot of people think, oh, the more oxygen I give, the more anesthetic I'm giving. But what you're really doing, if you think about it, if I drive from here to Disney World and I floor it the whole way, I'm gonna get there really, really fast, right? But I'm burning gas, right? So if you increase that, it's gonna get to them fast, but it's gonna be diluted, right? If you lower it, it's gonna get to them slower, but it's gonna be more concentrated, right? It's not diluted where, like, if you put on 3 and you run this up to 4, it's not putting out 1. It's probably gonna be like a 15% dilution on the high side. It's not gonna be, you know, a full percentage, okay?
But if you need to fill, like say your bag that the patient's breathing from is empty and you want to fill it, you want to turn your flow rate up a little bit. You don't have to turn it up to 4 or 5, but you want to turn it up a little bit until you can fill that bag, because then if your purpose is to keep the patient under anesthesia, you're filling that bag with ISO and with oxygen instead of this is just oxygen. So that'll fill the bag really fast, but it's not necessarily the reason that you want it to be filled. So you have to be thinking about what is your purpose of filling that bag for? What are you trying to accomplish from here?
In the video that we watched too, whenever it said you started, when you first induced them, that you should increase your oxygen flow rate for like 10 minutes, have it kind of tight, and then back it off.
And you use
Help.
your pay, like there is a calculation that you can that you can do. That calculation is not always the most helpful. One of the other things you can calculate, but it's important. It's helpful to know that there is one. Yes, because you want to adjust that to your patient too. Because you can do a calculation, but that doesn't mean that's what your patient needs. So if you're noticing that your patient's not moving these valves well, or the patient's not under anesthesia well, one of the problems may be that your flow rate is too low and you need to turn it up a little bit.
How would you know if your flow rate's too low?
Yeah, right. I don't.
Well, you use the tools you have, right? So you have your CO2 sensor is the most important tool you have. So if your O2 flow rate's too low, your inspired CO2 is going to go up to 1. So it's called training the flow meter. So you can increase the flow until it goes from 1 to 0, or you can decrease it where it goes from 0 to 1, and then you can find that happy medium where you want to be, right? So you use the tools that you have, right? Everybody understand how to use this, how to fill it, everything like that? Okay, we're not gonna get into what's called MAC. It's probably a little bit more intense and there's a lot of variables involved. But I wanna have a conversation about this before we get into going over leak tests, okay? So what this is it's a vaporizer. It's not like a vaporizer like your nicotine vapes. It's quite a bit different. It doesn't use heat, it uses cold air, and there's 42 components inside of it. There's a lot that goes on. The most important thing for you guys to understand is, I know it kind of looks, some of them look rectangle, these ones are round and cylindrical. What's in there is a wick, and it's wrapped around a coil. And the wick is submerged into the base of the vaporizer. That's why when you fill it, it shows you at the base what the level is. The wick absorbs the gas upwards, right? So if we had a paper towel roll and we stick it in a bucket of water, the paper towel roll is gonna absorb upwards, right? So if you come in and this is empty, like bone dry, and then you fill it and you use it within the next 10, 15 minutes, it's gonna put out less gas than you're expecting, okay? So try to keep them full. I usually try to tell everybody to fill them the night before you know you're going into surgery, to give it that time to absorb it. You can always add more, but if it's bone dry, it's not gonna work properly for you, okay? Another thing too that happens here, we see it all the time, it'll show that there's nothing there, but when you add it, it dumps out, it overfills, okay? If you look at this closely, there's a hole at the bottom and there's a hole at the top. They're just peepholes. But what happens over time is that wick will start to block the hole and it won't show you the proper level, okay? You cannot overfill them, they will spill out of the top, okay? So you can fill it until it comes out. When you put the cap on, if there's a little bit there, just take gauze, soak it up, throw the gauze away, okay? Another little trick here, where you fill this post right here, that's a drain plug, okay? If the machine ever gets knocked over, we have to drain the gas out of it. The way that you do that is it's an upside down screwdriver. This piece goes right on top. You unscrew it, you can drain it right back into your bottle, okay? And we need to let it sit for a couple hours and let it dry out, okay? If it gets knocked over or past 30 degrees, the wick is absorbing too much gas and it's gonna put too much out when you go to use it. Whenever you fill this, it's good practice to tighten this. Make sure it's nice and tight. It will get loose over time, okay? We know about this lock. We have to push that down. If you force it, you're gonna break the lock. Cool. Questions? Do you have anything you want
Does
to
anybody
elaborate
know
on?
what to do if you spill the gas?
Wipe it with the gauze and stuff.
What if you spill a lot of the gas?
Notify everyone
Yeah.
immediately.
And how do you
Yeah,
clean
you-
it up? What would you do if you need to clean it up? You spill a lot of gas on the ground, what do you put on it?
Cat litter, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
That happened one day and I either forgot or had a blonde moment and I didn't know. And we all had to leave the building in Port St. Lucie.
It's
The
not,
only- the only other thing I was
I've
gonna
seen
say
it.
is sometimes when people have patients under anesthesia, they need to fill, if they haven't paid attention, they need to
Yep.
fill it. Not everybody always is good about reminding you to turn the machine off.
Yeah.
So they start to fill it, one, you shouldn't do it, but two, it leaks out,
Yeah.
so they have to turn the machine off.
Yeah.
So, to elaborate on what Stephanie's explaining is, when this is off, oxygen is not traveling into the vaporizer. It's simply going across the plane, right? So for example, if I open this and I flow oxygen, there's nothing coming out of here at all. But if I open it, all of it's gonna bubble out. You're gonna see it, right? So if you have to fill it mid-surgery, you never turn this off, right? We know why we turn the flow meter, or why we don't turn the flow meter off.
Because then there's no circulation at all. for the
Correct,
patient.
right? So you turn the gas off, open, fill, close it, reopen the gas, right? Everybody understand that? You sure? If you get this in your eye, you're not gonna be having a fun day. It sucks, okay? This stuff is pretty gnarly. It will melt rubber and plastics, so try to keep it, from spilling. That's why your bags start to leak, because the isoflurane eats rubber. Okay, if you pay attention to this, you'll start to see these turn white over time. It's in the presence of long-term exposure, they create an oily substance and it dries rubber out. Okay? Does everybody understand that? Sure? Does everybody know how to calculate tidal volumes?
Yeah, that's what we're gonna.
No?
It said,
Okay.
it told you in the video, but it may have been hard to.
Yeah.
Do we know what a tidal volume is? No? Tidal volume is your lung capacity volume, right? So anytime you see tidal, it's referring to lungs, right? So lung volume, right? So to calculate tidal volume, there's two different ways to do it. On a ventilator, which is a different calculation, and on a rebreathing bag. The rebreathing bag tidal volume is 10 times your patient's weight in kilograms times 6. And that's the smallest size bag you can use, okay? The largest size bag you can use, you do the same calculation, but you don't use 10, you use 20. So it'd be 20 times your patient's weight in kilograms times 6. The 6 is a constant covering the expansion of the bag. That's why you're using 6, because this is a variable. It expands and retracts, right? The easy way to do it, do your calculation with 10, get your final number. Your final number is gonna be your answer in milliliters, right? So if you do your math and let's say you get 2,200 millimeters, what size bag are you gonna use on the small side? You round up. You always round up,
3.
right? So you go to 3. So if your calculation is 2,200 on a 10, instead of doing the math all over again, just double that number, right? And that's your high bag, your bigger bag. So how do you know which bag to use, right? That's a big difference. You got a 3, a 4, a 5, 6, right? So the answer is you want to use whichever bag is going to stay full, where the pressure is not going to increase past 5. 5 is on the high side. You really don't go past 3 with the pop-off open, okay? If the bag, I'm 230 pounds. If I exhale through here, watch the pressure gauge, even with the pop-off open, okay? Ready? Where'd it go to? 30?
Almost 30.
That's because that's too small for my lung volume, right? So you want to use the biggest bag possible, the smallest bag possible, where that pressure is not going to increase past 3, 5 on the high side. To put that in perspective, you close your mouth, breathe in through your nose, out through your nose, that's 5 centimeters of water. Not going to hurt anything, right? Questions?
Is 3 to 5 is our normal pressure when we're just breathing in there? Is that why you don't want it to go above 5? Where's the 5 from?
All your pop-off valves are rated to open up below 3, but
Okay.
if your bag is too small,
Yeah.
it's the flow is not going to be able to open it, if that makes sense. That's
Yeah.
what happened here.
Yeah.
It's because of the pressure.
Okay.
So it's just a rough number. So
And for those that know how to calculate like daily fluid rate for a patient, this was a nice little connection that video made, or one of them made, that the tidal volume is 60 to 90 mils per kg, like the fluid rate. So for the doctors in the room to use that. Well, nobody ever explained it to me that simple, but it makes sense with 10 and 6 and that's 16 times your patients.
Can you send me those videos or the link?
Yeah, yeah, I can.
From the guy who paid $100,000 for the last floor.
Yeah.
How quickly will the ice support?
It doesn't melt yours, I tested it.
No, but the one
I
the
tested
one
it.
in Port St. Lucie, I think that's what that staining's from.
It is.
Yeah, see, the,
It is.
you know, the white
I tested
spot?
it before you took possession.
Or
It's
the
not gonna be
link?
like an alien
Huh?
acid. burn.
No.
It's by the second table closest
So
to the
you
suture
know on
cabinet.
the machines you have at Port
those
St.
two
Lucie,
big
how it's
spots.
all powder coated blue? Well, if you look under the vaporizer, it's starting to discolor, so it's eating the
On the list when you
powder
send out
coating
all
out.
these.
But
Yeah,
this
it was
is
a text
different
message,
type of
but I'll
powder
send it to
coating,
you.
don't do it. But I tested it. I tested it.
Just don't leave any puddles.
Yeah.
Just get the liver.
Just put it
That looks
down.
horrible.
Do we know weights with the breathing circuits? We do? All right, what weight would you,
Over 15 pounds.
over 15?
Yeah, 15 and up.
Well, this is rated 35 and up. So this is an adult circuit.
Kilos. You were right. You
Okay.
mean in pounds or kilos? That video says cat
It does.
kigs. It said
Yeah.
15 kigs.
Okay.
Okay.
So you're right. You're
Okay.
just on the
Right.
wrong.
So this, well, this is adult.
Yes.
So the
And
pediatric
pediatric.
is, I'll let you discuss if you wanna talk about that.
I can.
Okay.
So everybody knows we have two different sizes of these tubes, correct? And so there's an adult system, which this is the adult system. And this is for over
I
think
15
you did
kilos
right.
or 32, 35.
It might be in the bag.
They're on the bags attached to all the.
Yeah, they're
What
right
do you
behind
think
you.
the pediatric line will also? will
Yeah,
look like?
yeah, all these bags have a non-rebreather and a pediatric.
What do you think the pediatric line will look like? Great. So the tube should be smaller because your patient should be smaller. And so it should be having to, but this is a lot of force that smaller patient, especially because we talked about this being a rebreathing circuit. So the patient is moving the air with its breaths instead of a non-rebreather where the air is being pushed through by the machine essentially. So you want your smaller patients to be able to move air easier in this smaller tubing because this would be too big for those patients under 30 pounds. And you can use this for patients even that would be on a non-rebreathing system because it's okay to do that. You turn up the gas or the oxygen flow rate like we're talking about, you can turn this rebreathing system into a non-rebreathing system if you need to. But if you have this on a patient and it's too small, then you have to take the whole machine apart if it's not doing what you want it to do, or you're having to be running the machine at levels that you don't want to be running it out because then you don't know that this is accurate, if your oxygen flow is too high, for all the reasons we've been talking about. So you should know that we have these. Are they all colored this way?
They're all
No,
different colors.
Okay.
Yeah, they
So
are
you
gonna
just
say
have
they're
to-
all- yeah.
So to kind of summarize that, you can, in the event you don't have an option, you can use this on any size patient. Under 35 pounds, under 15 kgs. You just have to pay attention to your O2 flow rate. You can't use that on anything over 15 kgs. It's like breathing through a straw. And it will tell you, it'll whistle at you if it's too small. So if you take that and you just whip it around, it'll whistle at you, and that's what'll happen.
The same thing essentially you're doing when you're blowing through it with
Correct.
the bag. But
Correct.
this isn't a bag, so it's not, you're
Yeah.
not gonna see it expand.
So,
So, I'm sorry, and how low of a weight can you use that on? So, because I always use my non-rebreather up to 20 pounds.
okay.
And so I'm just curious, because,
So we were talking about this earlier because we're starting to see a lot of facilities not use non-rebreathers.
okay,
They're using the pediatric circuit, a 1/2 liter bag, and they're increasing their O2 flow rate to carry that exhale, so they're not rebreathing CO2.
okay.
Specialty centers are doing that. It's really up to you guys. It's kind of difficult to have a conversation with somebody that's been using non-rebreathers for a really, really long time. But the reason that this started, or the reason non-rebreathers started is back in the day, anesthesia machines were made for human use, and these flutter discs were heavier. Now they're all extremely light. So at that exhale, it can pop up. It's not gonna allow anything to get stuck in that exhale tube going back to the machine. So you can do that. These machines are also set up for what's called a Bain block, which is a little attachment that sits here. It's literally a block of metal, has a pop-off, pressure gauge, slot for a bag, and it has what's called a Mapleson D circuit, which bypasses this. So it's kind of like this, but it's made for non-rebreathing. So it's really up to you guys. If you're gonna use that in a half-liter bag, I would just increase the O2 flow rate. I think AVMA says 300 mLs per kilogram per minute. I believe that's what it says, if you wanna do that, but it's entirely up to you guys. I don't like the non-rebreathers because you don't have a true pop-off valve and you don't have a true pressure gauge. So ventilation is kind of anybody's guess. So especially on smaller guys, you don't know the volume you're pushing at them.
So that can be used really in any size of proper fluid.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So we have, like Dr. Roy doesn't use non-rebreathers. He's using that. A lot of the specialty centers are using the pediatric circuits. So while we're on the subject, do you want to go into non-rebreathers or leak tests?
Let's do leak tests, that way
Okay.
we don't leave this set up, and then we'll
Okay.
do non-rebreathers.
So remember we talked about partial pressure? So partial pressure, remember the purity, high to low, right? It can't go from low to high. So we have to do a leak check on the system to confirm that nothing is leaving the system, right? There's a couple different ways to do it. I'm gonna teach you guys how I do it. I do leak tests probably about 50, 60 a day. So I've kind of like made things easier for myself, but I'm gonna teach you how they teach it in vet tech school, and then I'll teach you how I do it, okay? You need a bag, number one. You wanna inspect the bag, especially at the base and at the collar, okay? You wanna just inspect it, look at that one. Right, pretty large hole. So you wanna inspect the bag before you do it, because you don't wanna waste your oxygen and you don't wanna waste your time, right? So this one looks pretty good. So what you would do, and what I used to do, is if I come in the morning and I say, hey, we've got 6 surgeries, I'm checking all their weights, I'm checking all the tidal volumes, I'm checking which bags I'm gonna use, which machines I'm gonna use, and I'm leak checking everything before the patients even show up, right? Your machine leaks and mom drops a dog off, dog gets pre-medded, and we have to call mom and say, hey, our machines aren't working. Mom's not gonna be happy, right? So you wanna do all that prior to pre-medding anything if you can, right? So what you have to do is you essentially are trapping the oxygen in the system. So in order to do that, we have to hold this circuit off, right? For the first time. So I usually kind of just press it into the chunky part of my thumb and squeeze. Now on these particular machines, you have to close this, remember? So you close and you press. Now you've got your other hand. You never use the flush valve to do this. Always the flow meter. The reason you don't use the flush valve is because the flush valve is never gonna be hit when your patient's connected, right? It's not what's driving the gas. You wanna make sure this is being used because that's what's driving everything. So we'll make sure all the connections are tight. I don't even know the flow meter is on. So we'll go up, I go to 30, you guys don't go past 20, go up to 20, turn the flow meter off and let it sit. So we're trapping it in there, right? If there's a hole in the bag or a hole anywhere else where gas can escape, your pressure is gonna drop, right? Don't let this drive you crazy. Some people, it drives them crazy. The tiniest leak, we're gonna go over that, but don't let it drive you crazy, okay? It only needs to hold 10 seconds, okay? Is it still holding?
Yep.
Okay. What did Dr. Johnson say?
Release the pop-off valve.
Right? The reason she's explaining that is because if you're somewhere else and you open this could potentially be left closed. The reason I'm telling you this from my perspective is if I open this, if I let my hand go right now, what's gonna happen to the machine? Right? Everybody hear that? You guys heard that? If I open this, if I let this go, right? Which port does everything flow towards the patient at? Inhale, right? The exhale can't go to the patient. Exhale goes back to the machine. So if I let my hand go when we're under pressure, all the pressure is getting pushed through the sotasorb, and all that sotasorb powder is gonna get stuck in your inhale valve. Your inhale valve is directly connected to your trach, right? So if you're gonna breathe for your patient consistently, you could potentially send powder into their trach, right? Big problem. Just let go here, okay? Now, this is a little bit of a problem, right? You're manipulating things. I don't like doing it like this. The way that I do it is I separate these. Okay? And then if I leak here, I don't have to look for the leak here. I'm never gonna find that, right? But if I leak here, it's simple to just grab a tube in another bag or grab a tube first. If I leak still, then I can swap the bag. It's process of elimination, right? So what I'll do is I'll hold the valve closed, increase the oxygen. Now, if you have a very large bag, you can speed it up with the flush valve, but you don't use the flush valve for the whole procedure, okay? So you just touch it a couple times to speed it up. You don't need to sit there for 10 minutes filling a 5-liter bag, okay? So we'll go up. And do we know why we're going to 20? Nobody? Why are we going to 20?
Because you don't want to go past one patient.
The machine's never gonna go past 20 under normal use, right? So we turn the flow meter off. And the reason that I'm elaborating on that is some of the vet tech programs, I'm not sure why, but they're teaching to do this with the flow meter open still. We turn that off because if you had a hole in the bag, let's just use the bag had a leak, and the flow meter was still running, it's filling the void, right? So you don't have an accurate visualization of exactly what's happening. But you see how we're holding still now? So now I know that none of this leaks, right? So now that I know that none of that leaks, I can bring in my whole circuit, and if I have a leak then, my leak's here, right? Because you'll never find it there, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Questions on this so far? No? Okay.
And I would say that's probably the least likely place for there to be a leak
You'd
too,
be
right?
surprised.
Really?
Yeah.
Is the bag most common?
Bags most common. Breathing circuits are single use. I know we talked about that. Usually on here, you're gonna leak right around here. This is 3 pieces that are glued together. So the glue over time, the isoflurane eats it and it'll be able to leak from there. What do you do if you have a leak? Well, how do you gotta find it, right? But what if you don't have time? What if you don't have time to find it? We need to figure out how big the leak is, right? Because there's a tolerance level. The machine leaks. What's the tolerance level to where I can use it versus where I can't use it? Does anybody know? No? It's 0.2 liters per minute. That's the tolerance. That's the highest that you can have a leak to where you can still use it and it's not gonna affect the patient. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna make a leak happen, okay? So all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna unscrew this exhalation valve dome and we're gonna pretend like we've got a leak, right? Oxygen off, see the pressure gauge dropping? Right, so we got a leak, okay? So we'll just pretend you came in, started your leak check, machine's leaking. What you have to do is you do the same test again, but instead of turning the flow meter off, you bring it down to 0.2, okay? So we're gonna do that again. So we'll speed it up, we'll go up to 20, and then we'll bring this down to 0.2. Okay. If you bring it down to 0.2 and the pressure stays the same or it increases, the leak is minimal and it's not going to affect the patient and it's not going to affect you. If the pressure decreases, the leak is too large and you cannot use the machine safely. It's going to have a negative impact on the patient as well as potentially you guys breathing in anesthetic. Okay? 0.2 is your set point. Okay? So are we increasing, decreasing, staying the same?
We're dropping.
We're dropping? Okay. So if I just slightly close that, it should start to go back up. I made too big of a leak. It's kind of hard to manipulate it, but does everybody understand this though?
Yeah.
So you're just, it's called training the flow meter, the same thing as previously. So we're at about 0.1 and we're staying the same, right? But if I turn it off, are we leaking?
No.
Not at all?
Yes.
Yeah, slowly.
Slowly. Okay, so there is a tolerance range. Okay? Questions on leak checks? Super important. Really important. Should be doing them every single day, 5-6 times a day at least. Every bag, every circuit, every machine. Right? So the reason we talked about partial pressure, the machine's being used, right? Roughly 100% oxygen, right? What's our room oxygen? 20.9, right? So if partial pressure law shows us that purity is going to run high to low, we have 100% oxygen, any hole in the system is coming out, right? Same thing with isoflurane. How much isoflurane is in our room? None, right? So if there's none in our room and we have 3 or 4% running through the machine, we've got a hole in the machine coming out. It's almost like it's a magnet. It's attracted to come out, right? Does that make sense? All right, so when are you doing leak checks?
Before the patient.
When else? When else would you do a leak check? When you first get here and
At the end of the day.
at the, well, you can do that too. Anytime something's changed, you change a breathing circuit, leak check. You change Sozor, leak check. You change a bag, leak check. Fill it, leak check. You can't do it enough, right? This is your basic level testing on the machine, right? If you do a leak check, your bag's not leaking, you know, and you're still having some issues, something else is going on, right? So this is ground level troubleshooting, right? Questions? Does everybody understand the rebreathing head? Sure? Okay. Want to talk about non-rebreathers? Okay. All right, so we'll talk about non-rebreathers a little bit.
I know.
Because
you
I think a
have
lot of us
your-
use
huh?
the non-rebreathers.
I know.
You can use them. You can definitely use them. So this is called an Ayres non-rebreather, A-Y-R-E-S. And these are made by a couple different companies.
It should stay on.
It's a little tricky, but this is your pop-off valve. What?
Can you open one of the machine?
Yeah, I saw that,
What do you want me to do?
Open it.
Why?
because it's stressful.
It's open. It's not closed unless somebody
I
pushes
know,
it like this.
but I like it that way.
So on this system,
Mine-
this little circular component is your pop-off valve. Did you guys know that? You did? Okay, so you kind of have to push it to feel it's just a diaphragm. But what's happening with this is, and you would want to use this on, typically they say, what do you guys use, 15 pounds and under? 10?
20 pounds.
20 pounds and under? You can, I've seen Jaguars on these with just a giant bag. You can use it on any size patient. The downside to this is you're using more oxygen and you're using more anesthetic because it's not recirculating, right? So you guys are gonna use it 20 pounds and under. All that you're doing when you use this is you're bypassing the rebreathing head. So you're simply disconnecting, okay? And once that's disconnected, nothing's happening here at all. This can be closed, nothing's happening, okay? Not to stress out. All right? Well, she's always stressed out. So you have two of the same size fittings. Which one goes where? Orange to orange?
Yeah.
What if it wasn't labeled?
The one that goes directly from the plastic end is the one that gets hooked up to your
Correct.
circuit.
So when you connect a non-rebreather, all you're doing is bypassing this. You still have to have a flow meter. You still have to have a vaporizer if you want to present anesthetic. So all that you're doing with the non-rebreather, and this goes to your charcoal filter. Charcoal filter. Just like that. And then you don't want these sitting vertical. Do we know that? Yeah? Always on their side. If it's vertical, airflow can't come out.
Or it's a can be vertical
down
because
there.
it's
Yeah,
in
it's
the
usually
basket.
down there.
I don't want to cover the bottom.
Yep. So all you're doing is you're taking oxygen and anesthetic and you're running through this tube. Another reason I don't like these. And you're presenting it to them, right? You're pushing it into their trachea. They have to expand their lungs for gas exchange to happen. It just doesn't happen. You're not forcing them to breathe it in unless you squeeze that bag. And when you squeeze that bag, their lungs inflate. So it's going into the trach. Whatever they breathe in, don't breathe in, or exhale simply runs into the bag to create volume, and then up and out into your scavenge filter. That's all that's happening. So you would want to use this on smaller patients because some of them, when they exhale through this guy, if your O2 flow rate's not high enough, they're going to exhale and then they're going to inhale and breathe that CO2, and they're just going to go back and forth, right? That's why you're using this. Pretty simple, right? Does this answer any questions that you guys might have had? No? Okay.
I think I've seen them, and I know I've reached for the non-rebreather, it's probably just flow rate related, because when I've used the smaller rebreather, some of them we're just not keeping down, and that's it, we just don't have the flow rate. And so that's why I've reached for non-rebreathers sometimes. Even in that, you know, I have a 22, I would always go 0 to 20 non-rebreather, 20 to 40 the other circuit, and then 40 non-rebreather, the large one. And so those are just the simple numbers. But on some animals that were 18, 20, 22 pounds, we were having trouble keeping them under, and I go, hey, get me the non-rebreather, because with a good flow rate, it just seems to stay under.
Yep.
That's what we're doing wrong, is we don't have a flow rate high enough on the other side.
Yeah, also too, what size bag did you have on?
They usually probably have a 2 on there.
That's
Yeah.
that's probably why too.
Yeah.
So you would want to use a 1/2 to a 1.
Right, so
Yeah.
you probably use a too big a bag
Yeah.
and too slow flow.
Yeah, because the bag itself, it will get full. It just takes longer because it goes to the patient first, and then the bag's filling on this particular machine. The other machine we talked about where the bag doesn't have CO2 in it, that machine fills the bag first, and then it goes to the patient. You guys don't have one of those at Port St. Lucie.
But the bag is heated.
Well, they're reversed. The inhale and exhale are reversed. He's got one in his OR. His main OR machine is that machine. But that's the only machine in the veterinary space that the bag does not have CO2 in it. Every other machine, it's got CO2 in the bag. Pretty simple, right? Non-rebreathers, right? All you're doing is bypassing this. That's it. You can't connect things backwards. If you take something off, it's all designed. For example, I can't take this fitting and put it here. It won't connect, right? The only thing that you can mix up is your inhale and your exhale, right? Does that happen?
I'm sure.
Okay. So what happens if you mix them up? If it's like that,
The bag's not gonna.
it'll work, but what are we not utilizing? Temperature exchange, right? Remember, they get cold under anesthesia. Has anybody, I don't want to do it, but have you guys ever touched isoflurane?
No.
No? It's freezing. It's cold. Cold. So oxygen is also cold. Oxygen and ISO together, it's even colder, right? So if you are using it where this is backwards, you're not getting that temperature differential to help warm the body. That's all that's happening. You can still use it. It's not ideal, but you really want to use it the other way. You're also going to create a little bit more resistance because now we're exhaling through the inner tube, which is a smaller volume than the outer tube, right? It'll work, but it's not ideal, okay? Some people will also take your instrument tape and they'll tape where the inhale is. Some machines don't say inhale and exhale on them. How do we tell which is inhale, which is exhale? We went over that.
Turn on your oxygen.
Turn on your oxygen. And
It'll flow out of the inhale.
it'll flow out of the inhale. Exactly. And you can feel it. I mean, it's all right there, right? Does anybody want to do some leak checks? Who's never done one? We've all done them, so we're all professionals. Or are we just nerds? You got to do them.
I'm done.
You might as well do it now.
Me?
There we go. Want to use that for the tube?
I'm gonna do this way, so I've never done this.
Okay. Another trick too is when you do a leak test and you confirm that there's no leak, you could technically just put that bag here, and then you're leak checking 2 bags and the circuit at once, right? But then if you have a leak, you have more to rule out, right? Go ahead. So what pressure are you going to go to? Are you asking yourself?
That's where the safety is as well, is at 20, because it's not going over 20.
Well, why is the safety not in play during leak check?
The valve's closed and the button's down, so
Correct.
you're not allowing the safety to function.
Correct.
He's great.